The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
Drew, you're not supposed to ask good questions like that. Don't ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide. All right, well, this is Bill the Christian, and we're at the American Atheist Convention, and Drew is not with us, but Drew and I are going to discuss the interview after I get back. And I'm sitting here with James. James, welcome.
Thank you.
From Dallas, the first person to start a secular caucus in the state of Texas and who ran for city council of Dallas.
That's right.
And we're taking up the question, are Christians the only ones who legislate their morality? So James, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I think the phrasing of the question for me is, are Christians the only one that use their morality to legislate for the rest of us?
Okay.
And I would say no. I mean, we can point to Brunei and see that right off the bat, right? Sometimes these questions of morality, though, especially in like Saudi Arabia, is it a question of morality, or is it that they're using it to subjugate a whole class of their citizenship to maintain a patriarchy? So this is a super complex question.
Right.
So the answer, I think, is no. But where I do want to lead with this is that when Christians want me to follow, or the rest of the community to follow, something that they choose, then why should I be subjugated? Why should I be subjected to that? I don't think that atheists really, everything they advocate for is for greater freedom, right? LGBT equality, ability to shop on Sunday, buying a beer before noon on Sunday. I mean, things like that are all expansions of freedom. Whereas Christianity, as we've always understood it, has used the laws to promulgate their own power, to make sure that they maintain some demonstrable role to legislate for the lives of the subjects. And this goes all the way back to, ancient Catholic Church. I mean, that's what I think. Did I complicate the question too much?
No, not at all. So the way I would characterize it, and then we can kind of go from there, is that both sides want to legislate a set of values that they think will be for the good of the society as a whole. I'm pretty confident as a Christian that when I don't mean every law that's ever been passed, under the cloak of religion or with religion cloaked or whatever, but I think generally they really believe that these values are better for society. And I think that the non-Christian will advocate a set of values that they think are in the end good for society or better for society. And I guess I would think that there's sort of, to me, they're both doing the same kind of thing. So how would you respond to that?
I think that they both jump off from the same starting point, this Jungian view of a collective consciousness. Even in societies without religion or without Christianity, there's still taboos that the society themselves have decided upon. Yeah. So no atheist is going to go running around saying you should be allowed to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue unless they're running for president. Right. And then, so
you're sort of in agreement about that aspect, yes. What I just said.
Yes, and I'm not sure that the Christian church or any religion took that collective consciousness. I'm taking a very, Jungian view of it. But I see that they've incorporated those things and are using them as a launching pad for the rest of their things. So that's fine. I'm not advocating that.
So differentiate then, because I'm struggling a little bit to see right now how then, because what was in my mind anyway in asking the question was, aren't they both in the end trying to legislate their morality? They have a set of values, and both sides think it's better for society, and there's someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, whether I like that or you like it. And the blue laws, which Vokes did this essay we won't go into, but on advocating blue laws, even though Vokes is clearly liberal, and they don't have the same motives, that God has told us to honor the Sabbath or whatever, and that's why they're advocating blue laws. It was for a different set of values, but it ends up being the same sort of policy. So that seems to me to be sort of like an example of, in that case, it's literally the same policy, and so, but yet for a different set of values. So it seems like they're both trying to do the same thing. So differentiate for me how you see it. I'm not seeing the difference.
In Texas, under the blue laws, at one time, and I forget, I may reverse this, but you could buy a hammer but not nails on Sunday. So they would have this big thing across the thing. So what's the value that's being promulgated in that?
Well, I mean, I would have no idea other than that I assume their thought was whatever can try and discourage work, whatever impedes work on a Sunday, is going to be better for the society as a whole. And I have no idea what they said or argued for about that. I could probably myself produce some that are something like, well, workers are taken advantage of by the fat cats, the potters of society who run things, and they have enormous power, and you need to protect the little guy from being forced to work on a day where his religious conscience thinks he should be free from working, and therefore we're going to impede Potter from being able to trample upon the religious conscience of the little guy. And that's what I would guess would be one way they could have framed it, and actually really believe that. Really actually think that's a...
I think it's an arc of personal conviction.
Okay.
If you want to embark and do that, then you can be like the owner of Chick-fil-A, who does that. He shuts down on Sundays and gives his family and the workers the day off. Now, those people who may need to work don't have that opportunity now to work, but he's made the choice, and I'm actually one of these people who think that that's fine. Now, his LGBT views, that's different for me. I say that if your personal conviction is that you want to do something a certain way, then don't seek cover from the legislature to make it so that you aren't financially punished for it.
Okay.
I could see if I own a competing chain and I want to close on Sundays, then I would, and I don't want to lose customers, then I would try to get the legislature to pass a law that all of you have to close on Sunday.
So to use my analogy about my argument for the little guy, what would have been the problem with it? Because I would have thought it's a set of values, and which I'm assuming you would not be in favor of sort of that type of legislation, but what would be the problem with the argument? What's flawed in the argument? That the religious person says these are values, we care about the little guy, we want to protect them. And this is a way through policy to protect the little guy from being forced by the power brokers of trampling on the religious conscience. What would be wrong with that?
Okay, so I feel that
position?
There's several things muddled in there. One is workers' rights and one is a religious belief. My personal view on this, if we stick to the religious side of it, is that, well, I'm not a member of your religion. What if my religion says that on Sundays I should build houses for the poor and I need to acquire those tools to do it? I'm not going to be able to buy them. Or if I'm going to buy lunch for people when they're helping me accomplish my path to redemption.
Okay.
So who wins?
So the problem in that case, I guess what you're saying is that the policy itself was prejudicial, and you need a different kind of policy to try and accomplish that. I'm trying to think of how that would work, but
well, when I was young in Texas, there was a department store. And they would sell their entire inventory to a separate shell company at Saturday night at midnight for $1. And then that store would open back up on Sunday under a new ownership. And then Sunday at midnight, they would sell it back to the original for $1. Now, that was eventually busted, but that was a clever way around it. And what would have been wrong with that?
So let me ask you this then, do you think Vokes, I'm assuming you haven't read the article, but I believe from what I recall of it, it was a sort of little man argument. I may be wrong about that, but they must have some set of values that they are trumpeting, that they want to promote blue laws again. Again, clearly an unapologetically liberal writer promoting it. Would you have the same criticism of that as well, whatever the values were, because the policy would end up being the same?
I think this when I said it was balled up, now it's on the workers' rights side. And I could see, I'm not going to be bombastic about this.
Yeah.
This is something as a society that we decided was better, that we wanted to have.
Yeah.
We valued the family unit, we valued personal time, we found something in society that said if we have Sundays off and we all have this communal experience, then our society benefits as a whole. Then I would be for that. I think it's one of those cases where the subjugation of personal choice does sometimes help for the common good.
It seems like it, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to help you out on this podcast if you're looking for someone who's going to be strident.
I'm just trying to see
no.
if we can, if there's any divide in the issue. Like, in other words, I'm trying to see if, if my position is sort of flawed in some way, because I'm inclined to think whether the values themselves are motivated religiously or not, you could still have in other words, you could have, let's say, 40% of the society is deeply religious, and their motivation is the Sabbath and the Mosaic commands, right. Which, by the way, personally, as a Christian, I don't. It's a little bit problematic for me to see those laws applying to the church in the same way they did to Israel. But anyway, if there's 40% of the society is deeply religious and motivated by that, and 15% of the society is motivated by whatever Vok's author is, they would say carry the day on the legislation. And it might be a fairly complex contingent of people who bring the legislation across the line over the other 35 or 45% of people. And I would say, well, yeah, they are legislating their morality, but that's all laws, by definition, are legislating some type of morality. I don't know how it could be otherwise. So do you agree?
I agree that all laws legislate some particular view, but whether or not it's a collective consciousness or whether or not it's one rare, narrow thing.
Yeah.
On opening on Sunday, I could see where that would be a really great thing to have those kind of laws in place. But I also see that it's this Jenga tower of other blocks that have to be in place. I mean, Maslow, in my limited understanding, says that before you can climb the pyramid, there's certain basic needs that have to be met. And if you're working on the fringe of society, perhaps as a minimum wage worker, or you're working in a society where the minimum wage is allowed to be so low that you can't survive, then taking away 1/7 of your ability to earn is a brutal thing to do.
Right.
And so are those people going to be made whole? If we had a society where everyone, and I advocate for this openly. Let's make minimum wage where a family of 4 can afford, if both parents are working, a family of 4 can afford to feed and clothe and acquire a starter-end house at least, or like a city in Dallas, an apartment. Apartment prices are outrageous. So what's the point of minimum wage if we're going to make it such that it's not minimum for survival?
So
did that sound balled up?
No. Would you think that there'd be a lot of Christian opposition to that idea, like religiously motivated opposition? Because my inclination is to think a lot of Christians would forget the bit about the minimum wage itself, but a lot of Christians would think, it's something's problematic in our economy if there's not, you can't make on what the standards you just gave aren't enough to live in a simple house. I would think everybody's values would want to motivate them to some sort of policies. They might in the end have differences of how they analyze policy and what accomplishes that. But do you think of the sort of like the religious motivated person as generally being opposed to that goal?
I do.
You do? Okay. So what would their goal be? To create inequality as much as possible?
But I think they're against it by furthering their interest in alliance with a political party that would not support that. So as a unit, they may say, there may be real believers and say, we need to make it so these people can survive. But those people, evangelicals, for example, to a large extent, have aligned themselves with the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And the Republican Party's interests are antithetical to the things that they might be advocating. So when I say I do, I say these groups of individuals are not, and I don't know what their motivation is. Maybe it's they want to do they want to follow the politics of spite. You know, we're goading you, even though these interests hurt us personally. I think that's.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the actual way they understand the effect of a policy is where the difference is, rather than in the value per se. Is that what you're suggesting?
Almost there. I'm sorry for being so obtuse about this.
No, I'm just trying to understand it.
I think what I feel is that those people, Christians whom I generally think, except for a certain subset today, that most Christians are generally want to live a Christian value, want to live a Christian life. But in order to achieve their political power within our society, they've chosen to align with a party, and whether that's a legacy of racism and other issues, I don't know, but they've chosen to align with a party that clearly, and I will argue this with anyone, this party clearly is antithetical to most Christian belief.
Okay. So it's that either there's open hypocrisy or a subconscious hypocrisy or something that is the real issue, rather than the actual core values per se of something Jesus. Yeah, of what sort of Jesus. The problem then isn't so much your criticism, is more how they're living out what they claim to believe and so on.
How can you be I think it's clear to me, maybe I have the biases, but one party is openly advocating for some of these, for greater expansion and protection of the poorer people in our society, less well-off people in our society, at the cost of the upper end. Now, I'm not on the upper end, but I'm up enough that I could easily be taxed more, and would be glad to. But another party is not that way. Another party, in my view, appears to exist solely to make the burdens of the wealthier less in our society.
So how about for the Christian? Obviously, they have a large set of values. It's not just one set of values, like the issue of pro-life, abortion. Generally speaking, I think it's pretty easy to defend from the Christian text, the sacred text. That why most Christians are pro-life, and so that would be obviously a problem in that the Democratic Party's openly pro-choice as part of the platform and so on.
Sure.
So you would agree that the Christians are going to have to make some compromise, because if they jumped ship and voted Democrat, then they would obviously be disavowing some core values in order to do that. You'd agree with that, or?
I would say that in the singular, I agree with it, because if you're a single issue voter.
Well, I picked one issue. There'd be some,
But wouldn't you say that abortion seems to be as close to a single issue vote as is extant in our society today?
I actually don't, because I think of the abortion as more of a litmus test about the way people view the value of human life.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
So I would answer that by saying, I think their position is morally valuable, and I'm not denigrating it at all. But where I have an issue is when they don't want to teach in high school about birth control, when they only want to give a tool to a young person, which is the word no. That's an impossible, when you're we would not be here as humans today if the word no was successful in stopping. But when two people get together and they have a lack of tools for how to accomplish what evolution is leading them towards, then that, to me, is just facing the truth, but willfully looking another way. So I'm fine with that, but I want those anti-choice people, I want them to say, we're going to make abortion, we're going to make sex education available. We're going to remove the stigma of it from teenagers having it. We're not going to make it so that two 16-year-olds have sex in the back seat of a car, that one of them or both of them are going to be charged with sex crimes. Those things are ludicrous to me, in my personal view. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with if we approach in a holistic way, then we can eliminate the need for abortion, in my view.
And you think that would be better?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think that would be better.
Okay. My read on that, those sort of situations would be that the Christians' values are that it's actually better for the individuals involved not to have premarital sex, and that they're trying to come up with some way to discourage that, and particularly because since the sexual revolution, since Freud really, the growing sort of sexual libertinism has created lots of deep problems in society that are profoundly rotting to the core of the culture, and that we need to come up with some ways to try and discourage this type of behavior. Whether their policy decisions in the end are wise or are the right path is open to debate, I would think. But it seems to me in the end, back to our original question, it's a set of values against another set of values, and they're going to have different policies of what they think should promote their values, and that it's still going to be in the end a competition between two sets of values, right?
Values don't exist in an ether. There has to be a structural framework of logic and physicality about them.
Yeah.
It's a fact that if you practice safe sex, that your chances of getting a disease and or becoming pregnant are diminished greatly. This idea that condoms don't really work is wrong, right? Just wrong. And it's a lie promulgated for a basic purpose. So I think that if the
But that seems like at that point you're really debating the issue of whether the specific policy is wise or not.
That's right.
Rather than we're debating whether there's two sets of values that are in competition.
Well, I
right?
want to point out that when you were pointed out that there was a certain rot to society that their view is, my view is that rot exists because one side refuses to look at their structural framework realistically. Mm-hmm. And I will say this. Give me an example in the course of human history where a disease or problem has been eliminated from society by successful use of celibacy.
Well, of course, the Christian's not going to advocate celibacy, so it feels like a little bit of a straw man.
Celibacy before marriage.
Well, I see what you mean. Well, I think the way probably Christians would view it is that biology was a pretty safe indicator of preparation for marriage. So people tended to marry a lot younger, in their girls in their mid-teens to late teens, guys in their late teens to 20s.
12, wasn't she? 11 or 12.
Yeah, and so I was going to cite an example from my family, and I realized I should not do this right now on a podcast. But it's so that people simply were able to start having sex a lot younger, and it was just they didn't have to live till they were in their early 30s, but because of the changes in the economic social structures, people are just waiting a lot longer, and that's creating problems. And so, but again, we're at that point debating sort of policy. It seems to me that the debate is what the policies should be, rather than that we're really touching the issue that it's still in the end a set of core values in competition with one another.
I agree.
Which is what I think we start.
And what you've pointed out is that it is a set of core values, but those were mutable. Women married earlier because they basically had only one career path in life, right? They only had one career path. Yeah. And now, because hopefully we're continuing to grow in a society where women are equal partners, although I don't know why they would want to be equal with us when in so many ways they're better. Women are equal partners. We're working to a society where we can make sure that everyone has an opportunity to, if you want to be a physicist, you should be able to go be a physicist. If you want to be a mechanic, you should be able to be a mechanic. And no one should say, girls don't do that. That's the change that happened from when women were forced to be younger, is because they had no other way out of that construct.
So if we can get back to just the original idea, it seems like we're really, just to wrap up, it seems like we're really we're actually in agreement about the sort of its competing values idea. I think you're in agreement about that. And where the difference is maybe a little more about whether the Christian is going to be consistent, or the atheist or the non-Christian is going to be consistent in how they form their policies in relation to those values. Are they going to be intellectually consistent? I think that's where your main criticism is.
It's a big driver
right?
for me.
Yeah.
Consistency.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be trapped by the hobgoblin of a tiny mind either.
Yeah.
On consistency.
Well, and because I
are.
was going to say, I think I would probably agree with that. In the end, I think we're probably a little closer in that analysis, at least as far as we've taken it in the conversation.
Yeah.
But really great to talk to you, James. Absolutely fantastic. I wish Drew was here, of course, but we'll wrap it up and talk a little bit about this and in the after show.
I hope to make your top 5 dullest interviews.
No, actually, this is quite interesting. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Bill the Christian, and soon you will hear from Drew the Skeptic. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're back already. This is Drew the Skeptic, and Bill and I are going to discuss the episode you just heard. And I just wanted to say, first of all, I thought James was very honest. I really liked his the fact that he listened to you and your perspective, and sometimes he would say, okay, I get what you're saying about that, and he sort of adapted as the conversation went on.
Yeah, and he mentioned, if I just may say off the podcast, that he had some lifelong Christian friends from high school that he still gets together with.
Okay, yeah,
they get along. He said they get along very well, and I think that also, when you're not in your bubble and you connect with people from the other side, so to speak, of the cultural divide in whatever area it is, that I do think that makes a difference than when when I come along and he and I are sitting there talking.
Well, you see, in that sense, he seemed like my kind of atheist, because obviously I do think that Christians are not certainly of a repulsive ilk or anything. So. And I also thought, the question you put to him was, are Christians the only one who legislate their morality? His immediate answer was no. And, the rest of the conversation was some concerns he had about, some Christians can sometimes, but, some atheists have values that they want to see legislated.
Yeah, all legislation in one sense
and
is a set of
I think
values.
you both ended up kind of agreeing that, we're really just... Every human wants their values to come to fruition and live in a society where those values are implemented. Otherwise, what would we be advocating for if not our...
Did you agree with him that that the left is usually, which of course left-right doesn't necessarily mean Christian, non-Christian, but in this context, that's the way he was sort of painting it. But did you agree with him that the left is the one who's always expanding liberty, and the right is always constraining liberty?
I don't think we can say that completely. I think there's certainly instances like the cake baker who feels like his freedoms are being encroached upon by the left, and so I think I'm not saying that one side is right or wrong, but I'm saying both sides have reasons to feel that way about the other. So I don't think you can say that completely. I think we've talked about this before, but I think one thing that you've said that may be the case is that wherever I don't want to put words in your mouth. Maybe you haven't said this, but what I've understood is that the sort of historical part of this is that for many years and decades and centuries, the church has been an authority in the world, and if you have the church on your side, so to speak, to use Bob Dylan's words, you really can't be argued against. And so I think maybe sometimes liberals feel like the conservatives are claiming that God's on their side, and there's obviously liberal Christians, many of them. It's certainly not a 50-50 divide or anything close to it. So I think liberals, and especially Christian liberals, may feel like there's some hypocrisy there on the side of the conservative Christians. So I think it's just a big mess.
Yeah. Well, since progressive values were minority values for so long, I think it's why my subjective anecdotal impression is that it tends to be the non-religious, the secular left, that say that the right is shoving their religion or shoving their morality down their throat, legislating their morality. And I think it's because they've been the minority and it feels that way. But now, actually, it's flipped a little bit in that there's some people on the religious side that are saying, wait, some of these Supreme Court rulings and some of the things that are going on legislators, they're now shoving their morality down our throat. The reality is everybody's got a set of values they're trying to advocate
I'm sure in some way conservatives, and especially Christian conservatives, feel like ever since Roe versus Wade, the tide has been turning, and that they're more on the defensive than they used to be. Yeah. But on the same side, you have the liberals and the liberal Christians even feeling like the conservative Christians are still in power in some way.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I love it when you guys talked about the blue laws, because I think that was one thing where he was just kind of assuming, like most people do, that if we're going to have Sundays off or something, that's a vestigial biblical notion, that it's the Lord's day, it's the day of rest or whatever, even though that was Saturday, but whatever. Yeah. But I think both of you kind of came to a good agreement there that
I couldn't. It's funny you say that, because I couldn't quite tell if I was trying to say.
Well, you said that maybe it's just a looking after of the little guy to be able to have Sunday off and then not let the fat cats work everybody to the bone. It's just one of those issues. Like I really don't see. I really can totally see it from both sides. I'm not sure what the origins are, the history of it is.
But you sense that he seemed definitely not in favor of blue laws. It's why I brought up the article about the Vokes, because I thought it was striking that a liberal publication would include something that was advocating for blue laws again.
I think he backed off of it. I mean, I don't want to speak for James. I think he was very reasonable in listening to you and saying, well, maybe certainly if Vokes or Vox or however you said that is publishing about this from a liberal perspective in favor of blue laws, then there's got to be some both sides.
It's also an example of how it makes a difference when a publication that isn't just the predictable, stereotypical one advocates for a policy from a different angle. And I do think that...
Certainly if you're having trouble seeing both sides of that issue, and then that
helps.
happens, it's like, well, okay, I guess maybe I need to reconsider.
It makes you reconsider. Yeah, I'm no different. I'm sure you're no different from that.
It
also means we both need to have the courage to advocate for things we really are thinking about and believe in our own circles.
Yeah. Even
if it's not necessarily popular for our own circle. In my case, I would be needing to make a Christian, my values are, I'm hoping to derive from Christ, so I would like to be able to make a robust case from the Bible.
You don't want to make a case from a political side.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of my values as only shaped by exactly what Jesus said, because he didn't talk about everything.
Right.
And we have common sense and science and research to indicate certain things that I think, to me, it's all of the above that should come into the discussion. Sure. And but I do think that's an example of where it helps to have voices from both sides being willing to have a little courage and argue for things that they might think their tribe is not going to be in favor of.
Yeah.
And it gets people thinking a little differently.
Well, we don't have James here, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it does seem like in the end you guys agreed on a lot and agreed that really, sometimes they may or may not implement it well, but both sides are really just advocating for their values, and the divide is in really how well that's done, how well that's implemented and advocated, and there's definitely hypocrisy.
On both sides, no?
I would say on both sides. I'm not sure if James would agree with that, but I would certainly agree that especially when things get political, sometimes you just have to it seems like if you're going to dig in enough, you're going to be agreeing or at least sort of bringing along something that you don't really believe.
And you agree that Trump could be just a mess, and you could still vote for him because for a lot of people it's a binary choice.
I think what I was saying is that you always have eventually a lesser of two evils debate when you're picking between one side or another, unless you agree that Democrats have it all right or Republicans have it all right. You're always going to be deciding between what mirrors your values the most, and sometimes neither one of them look very much like your values. I'm sure.
All right, I think so. Great wrap up.
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
I'm Bill the Christian,
and I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hallbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.